Hello everyone, welcome to yet another episode of Przeprogramowani Podcast, where we meet very interesting people who are influencing the IT industry in this way or another. Today we are speaking with Fahad Heylaal, who is currently working as a principal software engineer at DAZN. And in this conversation, we'll be speaking about one of his recent children. I'm not gonna share all the spoilers right now, but hopefully he will tell us more about the concept, about the project. Hello, Fahad. Great to have you here.
Hey, Shamak. Thank you for inviting. Just for those who do not know, we tried a few times already to record this podcast before. We failed with some technicalities, but now we are back for the third time. So fingers crossed.
Exactly. So how's the saying? Third time a charm or something like this?
Yeah, third time is a charm. That's what they say.
Yeah. So hopefully this time everything will be fine. First thing first, I need to say that I really admire your dedication to record this conversation. We need to say to people that you changed your camera, and right now you're running some cinematic stuff over there. So I really respect that, man.
I really blame one of our common friends, Luca Mezzalira. He recently started a YouTube channel and he went all out talking about cameras and gears. So I just needed to find an excuse to buy something, and that's all I did.
I'm looking for some nice deals right now because I want to also change my system, but never mind. Recently, I participated in these workshops where I started speaking to people about full frame versus medium frame versus 1 inch sensors, and people were like, "The hell you're talking about, you idiot!" This is, no one cares. But let's keep this aside. We have some other topics to cover today. Featurevisor is one of the topics to cover. There is this project that you've been working on for quite some time now. But before we jump into Featurevisor, before we will share more details about it, I just wanted to give you a chance to introduce yourself because we are inviting people from very diverse backgrounds to our podcast. We are speaking with people who are coming from very different, companies, the types of companies, and so on and so forth. So before we speak about your projects, could you maybe tell us a little bit more about you and your background, and then we'll jump into what you're currently working on, if that's fine.
So my name is Fahad. So I currently work at DAZN as a principal engineer, individual contributor role. And if I really have to go to the beginning of my career or the way I started in programming, I have to say it started around 20 years ago. Back then we did not have Twitter, social medias, where programmers hang out more. So those were days with message boards, with PHP, BB, vBulletin, all this kind of small little communities here and there. And I started with a framework called Cake PHP. It was a very tight-knit community. Everyone knew each other. And from there, I started helping out other people. First, of course, I got a lot of help from others, learning and everything, including career-wise. And one thing led to another, freelance gigs after freelance gigs, and then led to full-time jobs. And before you know it, 2 decades are gone, and I'm just here right now, talking to you about programming. So I wouldn't say there was any plan or anything to become a programmer. So I just tinkering, and career just happened along the way, as a byproduct, let's say. So that's probably how I will sum it up.
Sounds great. So we'll definitely dig deeper into some of these stages of your career, but let's also focus on the title that you currently hold, which is a principal engineer. Could you tell us a little bit more about it? Because this is not something that all of the companies kind of roll out internally. Some of the companies are experimenting with this position. Some of them are pretty experienced in having such. So what this role is all about, if you could tell us, that would be great.
This is my so in a similar role. This is my second job in a second different company. And I really have to say, it can be very subjective. Different companies may use the same a name for the role, but have different expectations. So, I mean, for me, I think I would say it works best when you already have a bunch of different teams in a company. So wouldn't really expect this kind of role in like a much smaller company where you have like 10 or less employees. So if you go beyond 30, 40 or more, I think that's when you start like having this kind of like silos where teams are just doing their own thing, and they're not talking to each other much, and you need like someone to like at least be someone for the teams to communicate to, or like even push for like standards, best practices, or even find the problems of one team and see if other teams are like struggling with similar problems, and be like a kind of a glue that connects everyone. So size matters a lot, like in this kind of like companies, for example. So individual contributors I feel like have a much larger room to shine. So and in the end, I think it's more of a mix between people role and also like a technical role. It's not just one or the other. Like you really need a mix of both, because you have to talk to a lot of people, and you also have to be of someone that can support them without being a part of their team. So that's where also like one of the big challenges come with this role, because it's very easy, like the way you deal with people, and for them to see that you are not part of like their tribe, let's say, if I'm even saying the right word. So you really have to make them feel that you are there to help, and that's something that you really have to bring on board yourself. Like the role alone will not really help you much there. So it's about like how your interactions are.
Do you think that there is a correlation between the career ladder and the difficulty level that you experience? Do you think that the higher you go, the more difficult your life and work is, or it's just a different position with different set of challenges?
With ICs, I think it's, again, it will be very subjective, because
Let's be
it's somewhere.
subjective today.
Yeah, it's like it's borderline. Again, I'm repeating myself, like technical and people. So at some point you'll see yourself like supporting a lot of managers. Most of the time you'll see yourself supporting a lot of like engineers in the teams. Many times you'll also be dealing with like like product, like marketing. So it's like a lot of different areas, and each areas have their own difficulties, like each set of like challenges, and you don't always know that what challenges you're dealing with like every day or even every week per se. uh, if I have to like say just engineering, like purely like coding, in a team, and like staying on that path, then of course like with the next roles that you get, like higher roles you get, like the difficulty gets bigger. But with ICs, it's weird. Like I really cannot like quantify it in any way that it's like a linear path or like going up and down. It matters. It depends a lot on the environment that you find yourself in. And I must insist that it's never really the same, even if you're in the same company, because even the company itself often goes through reorganizations, different management comes in, different priorities are set for the year or like the quarter. So it's a matter of like constant adapting, like, and that never stops.
Got it. And if you think about your time as a IC who is solely focused on writing code, let's say a mid regular engineer, senior engineer, what would be the most surprising part of your job to this person on that level? Like, what would you tell to yourself like 2 years back, if I can ask? Or maybe from your perspective, right? What was your kind of expectation towards your advancement in this position a few years back? Was it something that you imagined, or something surprised you in this position?
A lot of things like become clear in hindsight, and I have to say that maybe 2 years ago I thought like I wish I could go back in time and tell myself something. After 2 years now, I'm like, no, I would not even dare to like mention that thing at all. So it's like it keeps changing, with like time, wisdom. Sometimes it's like a bit correlated. And but one thing that I really have to like always remember is I wish, and I still do, like even for my current like ongoing activities, I hope that I continue to read people's emotions a bit more than just the problem or the challenge that is being tackled, because I think that makes such a big difference in your approach. And as an IC, you don't really have authority. You have no power to tell someone what to do. All you have in your like let's say control is not even control. Like all you can do is influence people. This is the only keyword that you have that you can like survive with. And and you can't really influence if you don't go for understanding people, like in the individual characters that you deal with. Doesn't matter what role they have, like, or high or low hierarchy. Like, it's just individuals. They're all different, and you really have to understand their problem, like what viewpoints they have, like where they're coming from with their challenges or complaints or whatever. If you cannot tap into that, it's gonna be a very miserable journey. That's something that I realized, like I would say, quite kind of the hard way.
Is it one of your goals to grow even more in this area in this area for the foreseeable future, or you want to be focused on something else, for example, more technical directions?
I think both. If I have to say, maybe the last few years, I spent reading a lot of books on like psychology and like people, so that like I also understand like how others might approach these like areas. Technicality, I mean, of course, like there's always so much to learn. Like, I mean, every week there's a new framework or a new way of working. Like, it's impossible to keep up. But one thing that really fascinates me about like just the human mind and psychology in general is like it's kind of constant, like for several centuries. Like, not much has changed, like the way people behave, the way people react. So as someone who wishes to learn, I think it's very exciting, or like very it just draws you in, like learn something that you can like keep on like reaping the benefits of for a long time, unlike like technological advancement.
Front-end frameworks.
Oof, don't even get me there. Like, I mean, you learn something, boom, like you don't even need it anymore after 6 months. So what did I spend all my time for? But with
React versus Angular, man, what is the answer?
I did start with Angular 1.x, I remember, with all these directives, API, and other things.
Yeah.
But then I found React. I never looked back. Like it's just simple. Like it fits the mental model of people very well, and I think that's really their main reason why React is so successful today, because of that mental model they have, and they really stuck to it even after all these years.
So we've mentioned, let's say the story that you've been through. We've mentioned some of the stages of your development. How would you let's say develop some other skills in the current job market, which is pretty tough and pretty rough? Do you think that some of the activities, such as, for example, developing your own portfolio or mastering soft skills, help you differentiate from the competition? Or like you've been in this industry for many years, so do you think that we are actually going through some more difficult cycles, or it's been always like that? How do you see it?
I feel it will always be like this, and as technology gets more approachable, more, let's say, easily available to everyone. Like if I just give one example, like from maybe a decade ago, like learning something meant that you really have to like go through some books, like study yourself, and then you like like get better at it. Now everything is just like one YouTube search away. There are like multiple people, like thanks to them, like they're creating so many like materials for people to like learn from, and like also teaching is a great form of learning for yourself even. And so it's like the reverse impact. Like there's too much content to like study. You don't know what to pick anymore. Not like many years ago when we had ideas to learn about, but we didn't have the content like really readily available for us. And so it's always going to be like a challenge, like what you pick, what you choose. So imagine like lately we have a big boom in like machine learning and AI technologies and everything, so a lot of tools like LangChain and others are like popping up. So these are all new, and people are like really driving to it. And but nobody knows if they are even going to like stay after 6 months or 1 year. Maybe something new will come in and replace. So
we've been there with cryptocurrency bubble last year, right? And NFTs.
I mean, that's like that's, if we talk about that will probably require a whole new episode for us. I mean, I really
feel invited. Feel invited.
Thanks for that, Shamek. But it's like, like things are changing so fast, and but there's also a beauty to that. And there was a book I read recently. It was called like Why Nations Fail. It was telling like how societies, cultures, and economies like go through this like cycle of like going up and then down. And the term that was mentioned there was called like creative destruction. So it's not like war or something. It's just creative destruction. Like calculator, for example, just like popped up all one day, and people did not need to calculate a lot in their minds anymore. They could just like press some buttons, and maybe, I'm assuming, a lot of jobs were like like not needed anymore because you had a calculator. So technology like this will always keep doing that. it's sometimes matter of luck. Like you pick something that really stays at least stable the next 5 years, so you can build a career out of it. Otherwise, you just keep hopping from one thing to another, and that's what we've been doing. I mean, you and I, we both have pretty long careers now, so we have gone through many ups and downs, and it's a journey that I don't think will never stop.
Do you think that you're leveraging your pet projects to, for example, keep this longevity of your interests? Is it a way to get out of this kind of craziness, hype cycle, or this is for different purposes?
Maybe. I wouldn't give a very binary answer to this. I don't think it's a strict yes or a strict no. So I don't really, put a lot of effort in the projects like open source, especially which I do in my own time, unless the problem really, really bugs me. I really need to feel very strongly about this problem, that, okay, this is a problem I really want to solve for myself first. And I'm I really want to see it through. Maybe along the way, more people will join me in that cause and make that project better and maybe adopt it and grow it. But those are all something that comes later. First few months, it's a pretty lonely journey. Maybe you will not even be able to convince anyone that it's an idea worth even pursuing, but it's your own self-belief that you just put all the effort in, and then something happens. It's a way, I think I would agree with you. It's also a way to shut down a lot of the sensory inputs of your brain, with all the distractions that social media and everything throws at you. So you just focus on building one thing and one thing only. So you put all your focus and energy there. But it's a mix of both, that too. But that's more like a side effect, I would say. You appreciate that benefit, but the driving force would be something that you really have to believe in to solve for yourself.
Before hitting the recording button, we've been talking about Oppenheimer and our insights with regards to this movie. I've been watching the interview with Christopher Nolan, who said that he's actually living like a Amish, pretty much offline for most of the time, just to avoid all those inputs and kind of being overloaded with the data, with the information, with people telling him what to do, and so on and so forth. Obviously, it landed on most of the social media as, hey, there's this weird guy living offline, producing great movies. Should we do something like this? Is it a pattern to follow? Or, but this is definitely something worth considering, right? Another conversation for another 10 hours, I guess.
It is, but you also have to understand that there is a generational gap involved. So I think you and I are we're same age almost. So we are in the middle. We know the world before internet took over. We also know the world that is full of IoT devices everywhere. So we can at least compare. But if I look at my cousins, children, in UK, for example, iPad, iPhone, they can't live without it. It's impossible. So this is the world they're growing up in.
Brain extension.
Yeah. So when you take that away, I don't know how they will cope. They're still very young. And so they're kind of used to growing up with that. Maybe for us, it would be growing up with computers, in our teenage life. So generational gap really makes a big difference. So it's about how you adapt your way of living from a very early stage, because if you do not have something to compare, I don't think they will know what it feels like to live without it.
Something that bothers me is the outcome or output that this generation will be producing. This generation that is online first seems to be producing pretty different kind of a content, for example, on the YouTube, to what I've been used to in the past, and that might be one of the concerns, one of the risks of being online first, right? That actually you are influenced by so many inputs that you are losing your own identity, right? Because the identity is being influenced by so many kind of role models. Wondering if they are even role models, but you know what I mean, right? That the question will be what you are actually standing behind, right?
I think the concept of originality, that will have a completely new definition maybe in the next decade or two, because if I just quickly summarize it with the concept of, not the concept, industry of music, when synthesizers first came in, I think the real musicians who would play instruments, let's say, were very furious, no, they're not real music, so it should not happen. But do you listen to any song right now that is not really using a synthesizer or something digital? So I think creativity and originality finds a way by adapting with technology that keeps changing all the time. Before, people made music in a studio. Now people may be making music in the computer, like in their bedroom, but still music. You are still creating. So maybe we are attached to the past with a more romantic view of it, like, no, this is like sacred, it should not be touched. But no matter how we wish to like cling to it, like things will just keep on changing, and we just have to accept it.
Speaking about creation, I think it's a good time to introduce the main character of this conversation, which is the thing called Featurevisor. Could you tell us a little bit more about the effect of your work, of your efforts, what the Featurevisor is and what kind of problems it solves? How did you come up with this idea?
Yeah, absolutely. So before I like go into the tool itself, maybe I can take a few steps back and talk about the concept of feature management in general in software engineering. So like several years ago, that like the movement started, how you can like decouple releases from deployment. So you could like keep on like continuously delivering like a new code and like ship it to production. So like you can like more velocity and like make teams like move faster. So one of the implementation detail of that movement was feature flags. So you could like have like an on-off switch like in your code, saying that, okay, if some conditions match, then you do this. If it doesn't match, don't do it, like skip it, like just like very simple if else statement in code. And so what it allowed us to do was, okay, we have built, let's say, a new like a button in our landing page that is like the call to action for like the sign up flow in some e-commerce application, just for example. But we built it, and we also want to ship the code to production, but we don't want to enable it yet. We don't want to expose it to the users like who will come to this landing page. So what could engineers do? They could say like, okay, I will put it in a condition, like if my conditions are true, then show this button, otherwise don't show it. Very simple example, but you can have like many different like complex examples too with this kind of technique. And other thing that was like, okay, we ship the code, that's deployment. We deployed our code, but it's not released yet. That's the difference. So the release part is like when we expose it to the users, and that control could be given to like the engineering team themselves via some separate tool without touching the original piece of application that they wrote already. It could be controlled by like your ops team, product managers, marketing team, doesn't matter who, someone with access who can like control it and like make the change. So this allowed like things to be like completely decoupled. Engineering could move at their own pace, like just keep shipping all the time, and then product or like other areas of the business could like control like when to like release and go live with the features. So this is kind of a common practice in many different companies already. So and I've also like have experience dealing with like multiple third-party SaaS tools for like feature flagging needs. And also like feature management is such a broad umbrella. I mean, it's not really just on-off switches that you have as flags. You also have concepts like A/B testing, multivariate testing for like testing different combinations of your product journey to see like which one converts better, brings more revenue, or whatever your conversion goals are, and then pick the winning one. And then comes also like runtime configuration management, like some variable value like color, red, this kind of stuff. It could be anything that your application needs. So it kind of exploded with use cases. And I feel like there are many companies, like we are providing tools, like I have used different tools, like I mentioned before, in different companies. So some are like geared more towards just feature flagging itself, nothing more, like with targeting rules, like I want to do a canary release of 30% traffic or something like that. Then you have different tools which are more geared towards A/B testing and analytics for experimentation purposes. And the way I see it is like very quickly, these tools get very easily abused as a runtime configuration tool. Like before you know it, you have like some stringified JSON, like put in some input box in those tools, and you're loading them in the browser. It's just horrendous. And also like, so I've had like many different, I don't want to use the word fights, but let's say like confrontation with like product
debates.
and
Okay.
Yeah, so that's a more polite way to say it, because they need this kind of like flexibility to like be able to experiment with their products with as like a swiftness as possible. And engineering is not even at the same time providing a tool that can actually bridge that gap between the two parties. And also at the same time, engineering would not be very happy to use a third party tool for running critical business configuration that could easily go wrong with no reviews and approvals. You don't know when someone is making the change, like at what time, what's the blast radius of the change, like which areas of your application will be touched by that. So it's a lot of anxiety that engineering has, because at the end of the day, we like to have control of what's happening in production with our code, because over what happens is at night, if something goes wrong, it is us that gets paged and woken up. It's not really someone else. So that's where I'm very unapologetically engineering first minded guy. So I really want to make sure that engineers' life are always better, if not the best. So this kind of my own pent up frustrations led to building a tool that could be very much going through engineering workflow, as pull requests in a Git repository, very declarative with all this configuration, if it's a flag with on-off values, if it's variation experiments with variations, if you have variables with a strict schema of your variable types. So nothing happens as a surprise. So I really want to reduce that surprise factor, for all engineers, whoever dealing with, let's say, remote configuration or any kind of feature management concept. So that all that led me to build this tool that I'm calling Featurevisor, because it's a mix of supervisor and feature management together. So I'm someone is supervising this whole thing, so that nothing is a wild west. So nothing goes without anyone's approval. And that's what the tool is. And so it's a Git-based tool. Everyone sends a pull request for any kind of change for features management they want to do. And once you merge the PR, it triggers a CI/CD pipeline that prepares that configuration based on the details that you already have expressed as declarative YAMLs. And then you consume those files with the SDKs that this project already provides in your client-side applications.
Sounds impressive. That's what I can tell at this point. You know that we have a very diverse audience, and during our preparation to this conversation, we've been wondering if this is interesting or possible to actually run a small demo or screen sharing during this conversation. I think we're gonna avoid very direct screen sharing, but I think what we could do is that we could go one level down in terms of the details. And my question to you would be if you could walk people through, let's say, this one imaginary pipeline with the usage of Featurevisor. Let's say that I come along on your website, I stumble upon all the features, and for example, the first thing I read is that there is the concept of GitOps being used, right? So let's maybe talk a little bit more technical right now. If you could explain others what GitOps is, why did you decide to go into this direction, and then let's imagine this first pipeline that we can build with Featurevisor.
Yep. So I can try to explain what I mean by GitOps, and I'll be very honest that I did not really think of this term when building this project. So in my mind, it was all about just make it Git based, so nothing goes without a pull request workflow, and I want everything to be audited, auditable, and having a history of all the changes. And then I found out some other projects that use the word GitOps quite often, but those are more in line with more infrastructure level work, Kubernetes clusters and all those stuff, which I don't know much about, to be honest. And so the idea with GitOps is you declare what you expect your ideal state to be of whatever that is. Either it's your application or your feature flags or the remote configuration or your the infrastructure where your application is running in. So you declare what your expectation is, what your ideal state is, and then based on this state, once it's merged to the main branch or master branch in your Git repository, your system just adapts to it. So that is basically GitOps. It's operations, but going through a Git workflow, and how you react to it is completely up to you. So in this project's case, it's all about feature flags and it's basically feature management. So you declare how you wish your features to behave against what rules, what conditions, in what different rollout rules. So you just declare it. Rest is taken care of entirely by the CI/CD workflow.
How does this declaration works from a perspective of a project owner? Let's say that I'm developing a SaaS application. There is this thing called Featurevisor. How to integrate these two?
Okay, so first of all, like I have to say that the tagline of this project is like it's called feature management for developers. So you really have to go through this Git workflow. So someone needs to know how to use Git itself. And if I have to draw in some parallels with some other projects that I've done in like the current company, so there are like many other tools that I've built with this kind of like similar workflow where you declare like what you wish your state to be for whatever applications you're building. And I managed to onboard even like non-engineering folks, like in analytics, some from product, even marketing actually. So they are actually using GitHub because GitHub already has this like UI in the browser directly where you can like edit files in a branch, send a pull request, do the reviews without even having to open terminal or VS Code, like you do it all in the browser. So it kind of like works once they are, of course, like going to the initial onboarding process. So now coming back to your original question, like imagine someone is managing a SaaS tool, like, or any application basically, and they want to like manage their feature flags. There's no UI with this workflow. So the only UI you get is basically updating the YAML files because everything is declared as like expressions, like how you wish your state to be, and that's how you like go about your like workflow. So in traditional tools like paid tools or even many open source ones, you see that you log into an application, you see a list of feature flags, you go into them, like click on, click off, something like that. So none of that exists in Featurevisor.
Is it by design or this is on the roadmap?
This is by design, because if I really have to go through, let's say, making it a fully fledged application with UI, that will bring in a lot of extra hurdles that I'm not really willing to undertake at this moment because of this separation, because everything is like just like declared like YAML files, nothing more than that. It helped keep the operational overhead very, very minimal with Featurevisor. All you need is just a CI/CD pipeline. Doesn't matter if you're using GitHub with GitHub Actions or maybe Bitbucket with their own CI/CD pipeline, whatever it is. In a way, it is very cloud native. And the only other component that you need is basically a server where you can host static JSON files, nothing more. So it could be a CDN that you have in your own infrastructure, or you could be using like some public CDNs like Cloudflare provides already with AWS. You have like CloudFront. So managing a CDN is a lot easier because you just create it once and basically cloud provider like will take care of it for you. All you have to do is just upload the files and nothing more. But if you have a application that is like stateful on its own, then you have to like maybe Dockerize it, deploy it in a Kubernetes cluster, like scale it up and down. You have logging and monitoring. That adds so much extra responsibilities. I really just wanted to avoid all that. And I just want to deliver the result with as minimal like components needed as possible.
Sounds very elegant. That's what I need to say. You've mentioned the YAML files as the go-to source of truth and basically the way to configure basically everything, because this is the center stage for Featurevisor, if I'm not wrong, right? This YAML file. So what exactly does this YAML file contain? What can I find inside? Are there selected parts of this configuration that you can play with? Please elaborate on that.
Before like I go into individual features, maybe I can like help explain what are the building blocks of Featurevisor is.
Sure.
So there are like 3 different entities like in the concept. One is called attribute, second one is called segment, and the third one is basically the feature itself. So each of these entities will have their own YAML file. An attribute could be like the user ID attribute, for example. That is your user, the logged in user's ID. Then it could be like a country attribute to define like which country the user is from. It could be also an age like attribute that defines the user's age, so you can use it for different conditions, like if the user is adult or not, this kind of stuff. So these are like attributes. You can also call them properties in your mind, but I just went for this name in the system. And then comes the segments part, where you actually define your conditions for the targeting rules. So I could like create a new segment today saying that, okay, I want to create a segment for DACH region. So many companies use this term for like combining 3 countries together. That is D for Germany, A for Austria, and CH for like Switzerland. Yeah. So what I would do is like I would create a new segment in Featurevisor that will be its own YAML file, like segment/dac.yaml file, let's say, in the directory. And then I would say like, okay, I want to have my conditions this way. Like my attribute should be against like the country attribute. Like this is the value that I'm like willing to set my conditions against. Then I have an operator. So operator could be like equals, not equals, does it contain in this list or not? So there are like many operators in the documentation, so you can find them on the website. And then my original requirement was that I want to have 3 countries like listed for this segment. I could choose the in operator. So that's like checking if the value is like contained in an array of values. Then in the values property, I would just list all these like country codes that I have, and I have my segment created. Now, this is a very, very simple
Gotcha.
segment,
Okay.
of course, because it's like checking if the country belongs to like one of these 3 countries. I could also make it more complex with and or not kind of operators, like make it really large, saying that I only want to target iPhone users in United States. So I could have 2 conditions together in one segment. So I could do all of that. So that is attribute and then segments. Now let's come to the features themselves. So that's where like things get really interesting. So each feature is like its own YAML file, just like attributes and segments. And you can define like what your tags are, so that like it can produce like different JSON files. So if you're a large company, you might have like different applications running, in Android, iOS, web, or even like with microservices, like each service is having their own like different sets of configuration. So you could tag them properly, like so that like it's only loaded by the people that are intended to like consume it. Then you can also have this variations concept. Like if you want to have A/B testing in that feature, which is optional by the way, you don't really have to. So if you want, you can define your variations, like the control variation, there's a default behavior. You can also have the treatment variation to see like if this new behavior is like, something that we wish to go ahead with or not. You can have the weight distributions. And then you can have the environment specific rollouts also declared in the same feature YAML file. So traditionally, like you'll see that you have like development, testing, staging, and production environments in many software engineering companies. So you are free to choose like how many environments you wish to have for your like feature management, like in the project. So by default, like Featurevisor has like staging and production only, but you can like customize it with as many environments as you need depending on your requirements. And there in the rollout rules, you can say like, okay, I want my first rollout rule, like I want to target the dark segment, which we just created before in a separate segment. You can reference it by name, just dark, and say that I want to roll it to 100% of the dark traffic right now for this particular feature flag. And I can have like multiple different like, rollout rules targeting different countries, each having their own, like, let's say rollout percentage. So I can control it like with more ease and like with more flexibility. And also one thing I missed out when talking about it is, next to variations concept for A/B testing, it also has this concept of variables. So you can have like a runtime configuration, like whatever your configuration needs are, you can like manage it in one place and then have it like evaluated against all sorts of conditions that you have in the runtime in your applications. And that's basically the building blocks of Featurevisor. And the CI/CD pipeline just takes care of like producing these like config files based on your expressions, and then you can like download them from CDN and just consume it in your applications as you see fit.
Got it. So when thinking about the user space and the end user perspective, I'm wondering what are the let's say factors that influence certain design decisions. Because for example, you've mentioned, I explicitly wanted to ask you about dashboards and UI management. You've mentioned that it was kind of avoided by design to make this whole concept elegant and as simple as possible for the longest possible period of time. Were there any other design decisions that you've made very consciously that influence the way it looks as of today?
I will answer that question, but I also want to mention about like some additional features that the project also provides.
Okay.
So management of the configuration, like all the features, segments, and attributes are all going through like YAML file changes in a Git repository. That's like a given thing that's exists today. But I also have like added like a features in the project where you can generate a static site based on all your configuration that already exists, that is like available in like read-only mode. So imagine like you have like internally accessible website for your entire organization, where this like statically generated site that is like regenerated every time someone merges a pull request in your Featurevisor project repository can be hosted for everyone. So everyone can just go to the website, search the features, whatever they need to know their status, like where they're enabled, in what environments, with what like rules and everything. So that exists as an UI, but it's read-only mode. But for writing, like any updates, that really has to go through Git repo, because otherwise we have to go through all this application development and like.
Yeah. setting up whole different team just to maintain dashboards, then you need to create design system for dashboards, right? Then you have all the issues of microservices and welcome modern software engineering.
I really wanted to avoid that. Like if I had to build all of that, I don't think I would have been able to like build it all in the 4 months time that I had, for example. Like I've been building it for 4 months now, and there's still so much more to build even with just like a Git based workflow. But when UI and deployment and all this other stuff come in, like the complexity rises like many folds.
We'll in a minute we'll also cover the topic of your the way you organize the work and the team behind it, or the community around it, because this is also a topic of its own. But before that, let me get back to the design decisions. Something that I'm especially curious about, because the internet is full of tutorials for beginners, for newcomers, for new joiners, and this is not that a common thing to see advices from experienced developers. They have other things to do. They are running all the presentations. They are attending conferences. They are very busy. Now we have you. You are the principal engineer. You've made this tool. So let's talk about some other design decisions that you've made very, very consciously during the design, discovery, or implementation phase. Besides, for example, making it like a YAML first thing.
When you say design decisions, like, do you also mean like the core concepts of it, or like
the core concepts, or let's revert the timeline for 4 months back. Let's say we are back to the drawing board. You are thinking about this tool and you're making some of the decisions. I want to do this. I don't want to do that. I want to do something else. I want to avoid XYZ, right? So how was the scenario there?
So there was like the idea was like in my head like for more than a year, I would say, before I wrote even like a single line of code. And I really spent a lot of time talking to a lot of product people, marketing people, like understanding their requirements, and also at the same time understanding the frustrations of the engineering side. And I studied different tools, and I realized that some have just on-off state, some are more focused towards this like experimentation concept, and some are more geared towards like just configuration management. I could not find something that combines the three together. Something that is like good enough, that like fits my use case. Imagine like if I were to introduce such a tool at my current job right now, I couldn't find something that I could just like grab and just like embed it in the system and it just works. So it kind of like all those things like built the product that Featurevisor is today, like these requirements. I would say like it's very much influenced by the current challenge that I have in my current job, even in the previous jobs too. So those were driving these decisions. And but at the same time, when I think of the way to approach the development of the project, I really wanted to have a very programming language agnostic approach to it. So one of the reasons that I was choosing YAML as a declaration like a language, because I really wanted it to be something that is not tied to any specific like a programming language like TypeScript or like a Golang or PHP, whatever, So I wanted it to be like approachable by as many people as possible so they can contribute to this way of working. Either you are an engineer or not even an engineer, like you should not be intimidated by this. That was my idea, to make it as less intimidating as possible. The core, the builder of data files and the project itself is basically all hidden behind a command line application. So once you install Featurevisor, it's like exposes as like a global application that is available in your terminal. But even though that code is written with TypeScript, keeping Node.js runtime in mind, there's nothing stopping anyone from rewriting that into any other language of their choosing, because it's just a command line application. The what's underneath doesn't really matter as long as the behavior is the same. But there is also a second part of this application, like where you consume those like generated like configuration files in the runtime to evaluate the values. And those are SDKs. And right now, like I know like JavaScript best compared to other languages right now. So that's why I only have the JavaScript SDK right now with like as an NPM package. You can use it in Node.js, in the server. You can use it in browser environments. So it's universal. And we have a common friend. We know him. His name is Max Gallo. So I somehow managed to convince him to start developing the Swift SDK for like iOS and iPadOS environments. So that's already happening right now as we speak. And so the tool, the product, its reach is like very platform agnostic. The vision from the very beginning from my side was that make it
interfaces over policies, right?
Yeah,
Interfaces
exactly.
over
So you
policies.
summed it up very nicely. So it should be like platform agnostic. And that's why like having the concept of like this JSON, I'm calling them data files. So they're like the produced output from all the expressions that you have in the repository. So you can fetch them and like evaluate them with SDKs. Those SDKs should be in as many languages as possible. Like my original idea was like support at least 3 different programming languages to have like a maximum reach. One is of course JavaScript for both server side and client side. Second was and still is like Swift for like targeting the whole Apple ecosystem. And the third one, which hasn't begun yet, is Kotlin, so that like the Android ecosystem can also be covered. Like if you think of like majority of startups, like this is like the holy trio, if that's a way of saying it. Like this is like the 3 primary platforms that they are targeting. And then if there's more interest, like if there's a community forming around it, I'm sure like more and more SDKs will pop up in more languages.
So if I understand correctly, you've had this mental model of, let's say, a theoretical company that is developing certain type of online first products that is running and maintaining their own like a web version of the platform, but also mobile clients, and you wanted to address all their needs, right? This is how I read your summary.
Very much like influenced by the company that I work at, because we have like a bazillion of devices that we have to support. Like I don't have to tell you, like you and I share the same history.
Yep.
And so
living room for life.
Yeah, so those who know, they know. And so it's a lot of devices, a lot of different programming languages. So it's a very interesting, environment to be in, to even approach a project like this, because it's not just like something you build for the sake of building, but it's like driven by the real world scenarios that you're dealing with on an almost a day-to-day basis. So I hope like more people will like see it even from within the company. At this point, like I have some like many colleagues like within the company that who are like asking more questions around it. Maybe like we might use it in future, but I really can't say anything yet because it's a long process. It's a big company. Adopting a new tool is like never like an easy process, but at least like the discussions have started, like people are talking about it.
Let's talk about the other side of the equation. Let's talk about what's happening behind the curtain. You've mentioned TypeScript, you've mentioned Node.js runtime, but what exactly is the tech stack that you are relying on, or how did you come up with certain tech stack for this kind of a tool? Because in the user space, you said that the idea is to keep it pretty elegant, pretty simple. You have YAML files, 3 different building blocks, so I can pretty much imagine how to work with that, but how to build that? That's my question. That's my another question. So, how is your development process related to Featurevisor?
Painful. Like I mean, I think I rewrote it. Like,
I didn't expect that.
No, like there was this like a meme that was like floating around online, like a big red piece of cloth with some white text on top of it. It said like, "We did not do it because it is easy, but we did it because we thought it would." So my situation is very much like that. I thought like, oh, it's just on a feature flags. I'll just do it and be done with it. But
3 month
the more
project and we move on, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was very like I mean, it will sound very strong if I say it's annoyingly complicated sometimes. So there's a concept of bucketing users. Like you bucket a user into like different segments of like let's say 0 to 100 value, and like you have different parts, and you have to also make it consistent so that if the same user comes back in a different device, the same feature should be like consistently true or false depending on your like types of features that you have. So that was like very annoying to do, and I had to study a lot about like how like bucketing as a concept works, and so I did not see that coming. Like when I built, I thought like it'll just like random flip of coin, and like I'll just randomly assign, and then like, oh, how do I handle different devices, all that stuff.
So some hashing algorithm, something like this, or
yes. So that's so when like I had to like dive deep into like other hashing algorithms, and I found one called like a murmur hash, and so that's like one of the fastest algorithms that you can like use for hashing purposes. And I really needed something fast so that like even if someone wants to use it in server side at per request level, they can really go through the bucketing process like very insanely fast, and it has to be consistent and all that stuff like for the same user. So that even forced me to redo the model of the expressions of the features, the way they are written in YAML for Featurevisor. I had to force people to also understand the concept of bucketing, so they could like define how they want their individual features to be bucketed by. So they could like provide like information like, if it's just a single user, single application, you could always bucket by the user ID. So that's easy. But if you have like, complex
multi-user, multi-device environment,
multi-device, that's also, but still it's the same user ID, so it will stay consistent. So you can like hash it. But then you will also have use cases where you might have like Slack, for example. So they have the concept of organizations. It can be the same user, but you can log into different organizations. Then you have to like have this bucket by property that is like taking both org ID and then user ID. So it grew complex pretty fast.
Now we speak enterprise.
So I mean, things grew, and but then I have to say like I managed to at least keep the footprint of the expressions very small, so that like you can go for more complex bucketing if you choose to. But for 95% of the users who might want to try this tool out, they may need just one property. So for them, it will always stay simple.
Since we are speaking about enterprise-oriented topics, let me play this role of SOC 2 auditor. I need to ask about things like privacy and performance. Is there an impact or overhead on these two topics by integrating with Featurevisor, or this is my lack of experience, the reason that I'm asking this question? Like, was it a silly question, or this is
No, it's not. It's not a silly question at all. I remember the first word, privacy. What was the second one?
Performance.
Okay. So privacy, I have to say like tracking is something that you want to do not just for feature flags, to be honest. You want to do that for running an experiment like A/B testing, multivariate testing, and all that, to know that which variation is being like exposed to the user. That might be mapped to like a different conversion goal that you have. It could be like e-commerce, like a checkout flow, or like someone clicking a specific button, or upgrading, like different use cases. Featurevisor SDK does provide a tracking like event for like A/B test, so that like whenever you activate an experiment, like with the SDK in your like application, it bubbles an event up, and it's totally up to you then, the application like owner, how you wish to deal with that event. So recently, like one of our common colleagues, like Tommaso Paracciani, so he wrote a guide like how to integrate Featurevisor with like Google Analytics, just an example. So it just shows that how Featurevisor as a tool is agnostic of any analytics platform. Like it has no ties to it. It itself is not an analytics tool. It's a tool for like evaluating features, like in the runtime. It's totally up to you how you wish to like send the tracking events to what platforms and then analyze them. So in a way, it's like very adaptable. And depending on your company, like if you have a tool either in-house or like third-party tool that you're using, I'm pretty sure that it can already integrate with that.
And performance, another thing? The overhead to the runtime?
Yeah. So, I mean, of course, there's like the process of like executing, like going through the evaluation, and then of course the overhead of like loading the SDK itself and all that. And the SDK currently, like with all the features that I've like supported so far, it sits at like 6.6 kilobytes only. Like it's really tiny. And actually, the extra 1 or 2 kilobytes are there because of like supporting the semvar comparisons, like semantic versioning, like if the version is matching this or not. But others, the core SDK is like around 4 kilobytes, maybe something like that. And also the hashing algorithm that is being used, Marmar hash, is insanely fast. So I don't really have any strict benchmarking with like millions of requests right now. So I can provide you with something like that. But the footprint is very, very small. That I can guarantee. It does not have like all the extra overhead for like sending events to like 1 million different places. It completely like like avoids all of that by enabling you, but not taking over that responsibility. So it's up to you, like how you should like, add like even more stuff on top of it. And so that's the performance side, and it really works on both sides, like browser and servers, like without any additional libraries except for the hashing library. So yeah, the footprint is really small. So performance, I think, if you compare it with like the top 3-4 like SaaS companies around like experimentation and also feature flagging, I'm pretty sure that it will rank much better than those.
Strong statement, but this is why we are having this conversation. Shots fired.
I've looked into their code, and of course, like I'm not really trying to attack them, But the thing is that they have been evolving their product for many years,
Sure,
and
for
they
sure.
support a lot of older versions of data structures, like coming from their systems. And when you have to handle that many use cases, of course, you have to push the responsibility more towards SDKs, and that's when the size grows really big. For me, I really just created something 4 months ago. I don't really have that overhead of like carrying the weight of a startup that has been running for 5 years or more. Maybe if I wish to like maintain this like backwards compatibility for many more years to come, maybe I'll also hit the same problems. But I'm crossing my fingers, like hopefully that will not come. So it will like be like, this is the model. It just stays evergreen forever. But you never know, like changes may come like more often in future.
Small detail, you've mentioned Semver. So what's the use case of caring about Semver? Is it to ensure compatibility between what exactly, and why did you mention Semver?
Yeah, so softwares like when they are released, they are often like assigned a version number like 1.0.0, 1.2.3, something like that. And sometimes you may want to set some segments in Featurevisor. That's basically the targeting condition, saying that, okay, I want my feature to be enabled only after version 2.0 of this app, not before.
Got it.
So that's one way to like control, and Semver is like very crucial because that's how I'm expecting engineering to like set their conditions for like rolling out features sequentially. So that's why like it's very crucial to like have it in the system already.
Okay, there is also one other thing that I wanted to mention in this conversation, and this is the amount of transparency you're trying to provide by developing this tool, and this transparency is provided by going all in open source. Question is, are you going all in open source, or are you going, half all in open source, or some parts of the system are closed source? How does it look like from your perspective? Or you maybe have some plans to change the way of developing Featurevisor?
I'll be very honest, like I have zero ideas for monetization right now. And I'm really building something just for myself first, and hoping also like talking a lot about it lately outside so that more people can understand what I'm doing. Maybe it benefits them too. So I really have no idea of turning it into a startup. And also like the way I see this, it's very simple. Like it's a Git repository, a CI/CD pipeline, and a CDN for hosting JSON files. I mean, how do you even monetize it? I have no idea.
You need to wear your salesperson hat, right? I don't like this part of the conversation. No, I'm joking.
It's so simple. I mean, if let's say it ever has to go towards that level where it can potentially become a startup where people would want to pay for it by, like a regular SaaS, I think for that to happen, either this tool has to grow to the level of an analytics platform, or a sister tool has to be developed that can complement this tool, and those two can form a startup together. But analytics is like a totally different beast. It's so complicated. I really have no intention of going in there right now, but I do have like a soft spot for like data engineering and data science. So I plan to learn a lot. Like I deal with a lot of data engineers like at work. So I'm always learning, and maybe if something like clicks in my head, like, okay, I can see like this way analytics side can be made simpler or like made better, something that people might be willing to pay for, then I might do something. But right now I have none of those ideas.
Got it. So yeah, I guess you're thinking about monetization as another module that you can add to the equation, right? There's a module of the current state of things, right? Like open. So, what about open source? So if I understand correctly, because of the fact that right now it's kind of fully available, widely available, it's purely open source. Is that correct?
Everything is public, like the code, the documentation, like even the future ideas that I have as GitHub issues. So nothing is like kept private anywhere. Everything is like in that monorepo that is public.
Got it. I have to tell you that I have some minor stories from my adventure into the open source abyss. I just wanted to ask, how is your experience with this crazy world of hackers, contributors, naysayers, promoters, issues, and what's not? Was open source the good decision from your perspective, or you do something differently if you were to start this right now?
I'm a bit too biased, like in favor of open source myself. And if I have to like talk about my beginnings, like it started with open source, and I'm still doing open source after this many years. So I feel very, very grateful for that. And the entire career that I have, like, I owe it completely to open source and the people that I've met along the way because of that. So I'm always like trying to find a way how to like give back to the community and get more people involved into that project so that the project itself has like a chance to grow. Because alone you can do things okay, but I think it's more fun when you build something together, like with other people. So I can appreciate like the focus of like being able to do something alone for some really like a specific period of time. But if you can't share it with people, if you can't get users, doesn't have to be paid users, it can be like open source users too, like those adopting it. That's where the real reward is in my brain, I think. Like it's not, building is of course like very rewarding on its own, but also getting users, that's like a different kick that I get in my head, and I really like that feeling. And so that's why like I'm very pro open source, and I feel like this is not really that interesting an idea or unique an idea that has not been done before. Maybe it's done in a bit different way than other companies because there's no UI. It's everything is via Git workflow. Everything goes through pull requests. So maybe that's the only difference. But there are different kinds of tools who might cover at least parts of the feature set as standalone like startups that exist today. And so that's why I feel like if you want to have an edge, maybe just make it open source, like take the good bits that you need for yourself and fulfill your own needs first. And if there's a community around it, that's what like Eric Schmidt, I think the ex-CEO of Google, said once, that if you really have a community of like users around your tooling or product or whatever it is, there might be like hundreds of different ways that you can monetize it. So I think community comes first. Like you really want like people to want it to be successful if it's an open source project, and also like join that like a way of working and help like spread it in more companies. So once you have that network, more good things can come, either financially or non-financially. But community, that's like a first priority for me, like getting that initial batch of users involved.
Have you ever faced this feeling of, being worried that building in public brings you more cons than pros, downsides than upsides? Because this is something that we are also promoting, especially in the context of learning. My friend Marcin, with whom I co-founded this project, he's a huge supporter of learning in public, basically sharing all the wins and losses, learnings, and whatnot. But of course, it has some downsides, right? There are people who are just waiting for you to lose. There are people who want to criticize you for whatever you work on. Do you think that it brings more benefits to the Featurevisor that you're building in public, or to your kind of well-being, your private part?
I'm someone who really likes to avoid like the public, like limelight or something, So this is my first podcast in my entire life, by the way, and I'm not only doing it because it's you and I trust you. So I really try to avoid that, and attention is something that I'm not very comfortable with as a person. So, but at the same time, I also care a lot about making my project reach other people somehow. Like that's the marketing part. Like, and many people might like have a very negative approach to marketing, like, oh, he's like focusing on marketing too much, not the tool. I mean, nobody builds something without as open source unless they have this intention like in their mind to like make more people want like find it, like understand it, and then also adopt it maybe. So those are bonuses, but at least like you wish for that to happen. There's no way to deny that. And that's why I feel like it's really important to like at least let the word out. And I read it somewhere, I forgot like where. It says something like this, that if you do not talk about your work yourself, no one else will do that for you. So you really have to like do that yourself. Like you are the sole person responsible as a founder or like open source, like a creator or whatever. Like if it's your product, your project, you have to be the person that does it. It will never, if someone else wants to do it, like either like you pay someone to do it or like convince someone else to do that, I think it will not be the same intensity, same like enthusiasm or same passion that will like reflect in those actions. And from the internal like way of interacting with like engineers in different companies that I have done, I feel like if you're passionate about something, if you're really obsessed with something, people see that in your body language. It doesn't necessarily have to be the words or the fancy open graph banners of your blog post. Like people see that in you first. And if that's something that can be channeled and others see that, it's, at least statistically, you have a much higher chance of people joining you with your cause, and making it even bigger and greater than you could have possibly imagined. So I'm not saying that I have gone through that process myself before, but that's my internal belief. And so I'm just giving it my all, and I'll keep doing that for like next several months at least. There's so much still to build, and let's see where it goes.
So yeah, I think that this is pretty much aligned to this whole concept of building on top of your values instead of ideas, right? If you're an indie hacker, if you're an open source contributor, or someone that is running their own projects, this stuff really needs to be aligned with your values. And money comes at some point, but if the money is the only goal, you may get into troubles, right? So and a lot of people, especially from the venture capital firms, founders are saying that actually it's not the idea, but let's say the will to persist, this kind of development or growth that is the most important, right? So if you have this will, this inner drive, the results you may get will be vastly different. What about the collaboration part of open source? What have you experienced so far in terms of developing Featurevisor? I checked your GitHub. There are some issues that were created by other people, so I guess it's not your like a set of fake accounts that you created on GitHub, just speaking with yourself. Any surprises in this context, or actually nothing but support from others?
Positive and negative feedback is like they're both good. Like I see them like as like a win, because even if a feedback or like some comment, whatever it is, like some attention that is negative, you can use that somehow. It depends on like how you wish to use that. What I do fear is indifference. Like indifference is like the worst thing that you can get, like when you have to like think from like a marketing approach, like someone just didn't even give a crap about like what you're doing. That's the worst thing. Saying something bad, saying something good, both good. And so issues are coming, like with this project, like some people showing interest in like creating .NET SDK, for example, and like some other like documentation stuff too. So it's the reaching part, that's the hard part. And also like at some point, like it reached the homepage of Hacker News, and some people commented like they will not use it until it supports like mutually exclusive experiments. It's the concept when you don't want like two experiments to overlap for the same user, like A/B tests. And so that was feedback, and that was very like direct and very clear feedback. So within a week, I managed to like deliver that feature, and went back to the guy saying like, you know what, now it supports this feature, so thank you for your feedback. So this is something I always appreciate, because sometimes you start building something with an idea maybe, but it's impossible for one person to know of like all the use cases and all the like ways that particular idea can be utilized. So that's where like engagement becomes like a very important, and you have to draw people in like by going yourself like outside to like catch their attention. And discussions will start, and you will learn more from their experiences, from their expectations, and you just keep evolving the product. That's like product development in a way. So open source, I mean, it's something that I speak to my colleagues about often, that if we see that someone is into open source, and when it comes up like in the hiring details, like this person has like done some open source before, we immediately start thinking that okay, this person can also like somehow product manage, because you don't just build like a code like based on some storage description. You also know like how to conceptualize an idea, how to deliver the idea end to end, how to communicate that. And those things are really very important skills to have. Like it doesn't matter like if you are like doing open source or like working for closed source projects or not, but it does like add some extra value to you.
So if you were to recommend someone following the same path, or going into the same journey with their own pet projects, what kind of advice would you give to those people? Like what to prepare for, or what kind of skills are required or nice to have for such people who'd like to run something similar to Featurevisor? Does it require a certain level of experience, or this is kind of experience independent, or what the most crucial factors to get somehow close to this concept of success, quote unquote?
So I can give the answer in two different ways. One is that is a bit more product focused, that is like specific to Featurevisor, and that is something generic. So if I have to go more on the specific side for like, let's say, a feature management tool, I think it's important for one to suffer a bit by being in few different companies, understand like their different use cases, like see the different debates that happen between different parties in the organization. And if you like, building something is always great, but thing is, if you don't know those like little problems that happens at like human level, you might not produce a solution that actually fits in those use cases. And those are the things that makes big differences for the success criteria of many products. Now I'm talking in generic terms, like different startups, for example. And now if I have to like be more generic with my response, I would say that it's something I mentioned in the early in this call. I think like building something when you start yourself, it's a very, very lonely journey. Like many people will not even know that you exist or your product exists or that you're building something that's worthy. So all of that will come much, much later, if at all, if you're lucky. So it will be a very lonely journey. So unless you really feel very strongly about the building part yourself, I think you should not start. That would be my like suggestion. Like you'll just start like many like side projects that we engineers have. It will just like gather dust in a private repository on GitHub somewhere. But if you really want to get to the completion level, at least something that's usable by someone else, that's not you, I have to say that pick something that really, really bothers you. Like if it doesn't bother you, don't do it.
Sounds insightful, I would say. There's another question that comes to my mind. I missed that during the more technical part, but I'm wondering if you thought about the exclusion of non-technical roles when it comes to potential adoption of this tool, because we've been talking about this whole landscape of feature management. We've been talking about some design decisions involving UIs and dashboards or not doing that. Obviously, at some point, it comes down to the end user preferences, right? So by going into this path of keeping it simple, keeping it elegant and GitOps based, as a side effect, you are excluding certain people from using your tool, right? So are you already beyond this kind of consideration? Do you have your own answers to handle this issue or problem? How do you see it?
So it was a conscious decision first, like to make it developers focused, like build a tool that like fits well with the development like a life cycle and like workflows. That's why the tagline still says feature management for developers. But I should also mention that sometimes like from engineering side, we may not want to give too much credit to like non-engineering folks, like how quickly they can adapt and learn, like as long as you're willing to like teach them like the ways of like doing things. And I personally have had a lot of success by dealing with like non-engineers, especially in analytics department, experimentation, including some product managers as well. They just like flew like as soon as they found GitHub, and I showed them like how to create a branch, how to update some YAML files, not related to feature flags. It was something for some other cases, and those tools are still up and running in like different companies as of today. So, I mean, I think it's a matter of like you sometimes from engineering going out of your way to like maybe spend 2 days with those people that you want to onboard to this workflow. And I'm pretty sure like if you are willing to have a conversation, an honest conversation with those people, they will be up and running in less than 48 hours with this workflow. That's my belief. I mean, it's always going to be like a bit of a difficult thing because someone, let's say, will have their defense level very up. No, I don't want to learn something new. I just want to click around and that's it. It's about like how open they are, and it's up to you to convince them if you wish to like use this tool. And that's a limitation. And if we want to get rid of that limitation with Featurevisor, then the only way is to like really just get away from Git-based workflow and build like a fully UI-based application. And that is not really the scope of it.
Got it. And circling back to the previous topic of you sharing advices to the potential followers, this is also a factor that contributes to the overall discomfort of running similar initiatives, right? That you need to stop acting as a full-time engineer in certain parts of your job in order to make things successful, right? There are different hats to wear. There are different challenges to solve. Not everything can be solved by acting as a coder or software engineer, right? But this term is also very broad. So definitely, software engineering in modern companies also means not only writing code but actually acting in a way that you've just mentioned. But this is also something to keep in mind. Are there any inspirations in the open source community that you are that you're applying to your work on Featurevisor?
Inspiration and creativity are like kind of interlinked in a way, like one drives the other. And I feel like brain is such a thing, like your job sometimes is just to feed it with different sources of like how things are, like there's a painting, there's a cinema, there's this open source library, whatever it is, and it just comes out with something new, like as you like feed it with more and more information. So it's very difficult for me sometimes to like pinpoint like what is the source of my like action or like creative decision that I come up with. But if I really have to say like what triggers me positively, like from the open source community today, is like I'm a big fan of like the React community itself, the way like they came up with this like mental model that is still the same even after all these years. And it's almost like 10 years now, I think, for the library. So I'm very, very impressed by them. And it's something that I really wish to replicate in like many other projects that I might create, including Featurevisor. So I mentioned this like 3 building blocks: attributes, segments, and features. So I really want to like stay true to this initial mental model as long as possible for this project, so people can like stick to it and maybe even build more tools around it in future, because I don't know what other tools possibly could be built, but maybe I'll be surprised by people like coming up with these ideas. But these things are only possible if you can give them a very stable base to like build upon. And if you just keep on like changing things all the time, maybe for the better, but still it does not allow people to like settle around it and like build an ecosystem around it. So that's something that I really want to almost steal from React, like if I can use that word, and see like if I can replicate it somehow in my own way in this project and maybe other future projects as well.
Well, man, I'm wishing you all the best in going above and beyond with all the plans and roadmap that you have for this tool. Before we close this conversation, I just want to talk about things that are Featurevisor agnostic, and I want to ask you about your personal perspective on obtaining knowledge as a whole. Right? There are different ways of doing that. Some people tend to dig deeper and focus on some verticals. Some people are generalists, so they are exploring different areas of the landscape around them, different parts of the environment. What is your approach to obtaining new knowledge, right? It may be either related to your time on Featurevisor, it may be related to something else, maybe to your responsibilities in DAZN, but what's your default approach at this current level as a principal engineer to obtaining new knowledge?
I think I'm more driven by the problems that I'm like, finding myself in, or the challenges that I have to deal with at work. And also like as inputs, like I have social media, mostly LinkedIn and Twitter that I follow. And many people I follow, they like tweet about new cool things that are happening. But at some point, like maybe I'm getting older, I don't know. So the brain kind of wants to shut down on constant flow of new ideas all the time. So just wants to like focus on like what the problem that is in hand and what's the best possible way to solve it. And that's also the best way that I learn myself, like finding a problem first. Most of the time, I'm not really qualified to solve those problems, but I take the problem and then see what I need to learn, how I can learn it, and then come back to the problem and then solve it in a way that is like acceptable by other people, let's say, like working as a group. And that's something that has been working for me, I would say, like for quite a long time. And if I just pick up a book or read take some course or whatever, I mean, it just doesn't stick to my brains for some reason. It's like it's like going in and then coming out at the same time. So I'm more driven towards problem, and but different people are like different. Like everyone has their own learning process. So some really like to consume more and more knowledge before they even find the problem. But for me, what works is like problem first, then the solutions.
And more like a just-in-time approach. You learn when you really need to learn, and when there is actually something to solve, not just for the sake of learning, if I understand correctly, right? Got it. Are there any role models that you would recommend others to follow? Role models maybe in this industry, role models outside of this industry that you've been inspired by throughout the years?
In the industry, I really am a bit of maybe fan is a bit of an overstatement, but I really like
Part
Paul
of the
Graham.
church.
No. I don't even want to say that, but it's like I really admire like Paul Graham.
Okay.
Like
Yeah.
he's a co-founder of or founder, I don't know, of Y Combinator, like a startup accelerator in San Francisco. So a lot of companies like Dropbox, Airbnb, and others came out of that like an incubator. And I find myself like going back to reading his old essays sometimes, and he really is one of the clearest thinkers of this generation, I would say. Like he writes so clearly. Sorry. And he's very articulate. Like you read it, sometimes he's very smart, but you understand it. Like he's not trying to write it in a way that you don't get it or make him look smarter. So I really like people who can like think and also write clearly like him. And I think he's like one of the overall good guys. Like the way he talks to people, that way he thinks about world problems. So I like that mindset, very positive attitude, like not being negative at all, but at the same time also questioning things that need to be questioned. So this non-judgmental way of like being critical, that's something that I try to learn from his way of like, whatever interviews or articles that I come across written by him. So he's someone that I would consider a role model.
Speaking about writing, I need to ask this question because we are in 2023. We are living in a cyberpunk reality. Do you think that AI will enhance the way you work and change the way you produce outcomes? For example, Featurevisor, are you riding on the hype train, or this is something for another time? What's your take on this topic?
The thing is with AI, it's all data. Like, I mean, it's all data crunching, it's all
It's
statistics.
like the quote, the title of this conversation, right? Fahad
Yeah,
Heylaal,
it's all
data.
yeah, maybe in 50 years from now. But it's like, it's all data. And I think at the core of it is like statistics. And in school, I was very fascinated by it, even though like in my adult life, I never pursued like maths seriously. But I think it's very fascinating, like thinking in probabilities and like thinking in different branches where they lead. And the same way of thinking can also apply to life, not just in like AI tools or mathematics in general. But I'm a big I'm a bit of an optimist type, so I always want to like believe like the better thing will happen in future. Like we talked about calculators and synthesizers, taking away jobs of musicians and like those who can do maths better. But that didn't stop people from getting better in other kinds of skills. So imagine if there are like more and more mundane tasks that AI or like automation in general in like the industry can like take over. It might leave us with more free time to like think about more cooler problems, more important problems that maybe AI cannot be trained on because there is not enough data in the world to train those AI models, because AI can only do like based on what exists today and then start predicting the future, but it's not like it has to be trained. And those things I believe like are always going to come from humans. And maybe at some point like AI will become so super smart, so there's also a skeptical side of me, like there's a risk factor, there's no way to deny that it might become a bit smarter than human by studying all the humans and everything that there is to study like that exists as of today with all the data points. But nobody knows the future, and maybe we'll see a lot of regulation that like controls the usage of AI, or like maybe we will see something like people in general will have like a negative attitude and stop using services that can lead to feeding more data to the AI. So right now we are like really standing at a point where it can go in many different ways, and it's a really interesting time to be alive. Like we are like seeing it firsthand, like getting almost like at the first row seat in a cinema, like we are seeing it this close. And also like AI I think has existed for a long time, but we are mostly talking about it in the last few months or 1 year because we just saw the most successful AI product
Yes,
be
exactly.
productized for like common public. That is like OpenAI's like ChatGPT, and but it has existed even before. It's just that it became so reachable for us that we are now more worried about it. But I think if we talk about worrying, maybe we should have been worried even more than a few years ago, not just now.
Would you label the outcomes produced by AI, meaning art, movies, pictures, text? Would you somehow differentiate? Would you vote for differentiating that it was created by AI, or it doesn't really matter because art is just an art?
We as audience sometimes really like to worship like a favorite artist of ours, or it could be a political figure, like any figure basically. We like that human connection. So sometimes there's like an artist that you like, it could be any person. They might have had like 5 hit songs, all of them are like great, you just like dance to those like grooves and everything, but the 6th song is like absolute shit, but you still like it because of that emotional attachment that you have to the artist itself. That's where the branding comes in, that's where the logo, that's where the ego and all these things like come together to form that connection and that meaningful experience. So the way I see with AI is, if there's an AI model that you can attach yourself to, like, okay, this is an AI artist, something like XY or something, then maybe you'll have that connection. But if it's just the work itself that is being produced, I don't think it will have the same impact as you would by looking at the output of some artist that you already have been following for years. So that connection, I think, is very important for like appreciating things even more, because there are many like talented like musicians like playing piano in their like metro stations or railway stations, you know, that we just hear and don't even care about like taking a look at them. But if that same artist happens to be in like Royal Albert Hall or like, you know, somewhere like very fancy, you will appreciate them more. So it's subjective, based on location, based on the preference, based on the status symbol they are in the community already. So many factors, like it's not just the work, but a lot of things around it that makes things special.
I feel like we could have another conversation about AI and its implications. Let's have a break. I really appreciate having this conversation. Thanks a lot for sharing all the details about Featurevisor. It was a pleasure. You know, I hope that within a year or 2 or maybe 3 months from now we'll be speaking with a founder of, you know, large enterprise that is called Featurevisor. You don't want me to issue this?
No, thanks, Shamek. Like, I mean, I was a bit like worried because it's my first podcast, and you really made this very, very enjoyable experience for me. So thank you so much for that. And really, man, I really enjoyed this. So I don't know what more to say, really. I'm just like so very grateful to you.
Likewise. Thanks a lot for being part of this. Of course, you are invited to becoming a part of another conversation at some point in the future. All the best for you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Shamek. Hope you have a very, very good day.